Good afternoon. My name is Justin Mohammed, and I'm the Human Rights Law and Policy Campaigner at Amnesty International Canada. On the day after many Canadians have been rightfully preoccupied with the cases of Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavar's year-long detention, it is important for us not to lose sight of yet another Canadian who has spent almost a year in detention without trial. Amnesty International has been following with great concern the case of Yasser Albaz since his family was in touch with us in February of this year. Over 4,800 Amnesty members and supporters have signed Amnesty's urgent action petition in this case. And I note that even more impressively, over 37,000 have signed the petition organized by the family as of yesterday. We believe that Yasser's ongoing detention is arbitrary based on the information we have received from his family and from his legal counsel, and we call on the Egyptian authorities to release him. After 10 months, we are furthermore concerned that his detention risks becoming indefinite, especially when the review process, which now takes place only every 45 days, appears to be largely routine. Finally, there is a serious issue of the conditions in which Yasser is being detained. His cell is reportedly overcrowded, unhygienic, and he requires medical attention. With Foreign Affairs Minister François-Philippe in Egypt, there is a clear and obvious opportunity to resolve this case. Ongoing detention without charge is unacceptable, and the minister must ensure that his Egyptian counterparts put an immediate end to the human rights abuses that Yasser is suffering. I'll now turn it over to my colleague, Mustafa from the National Council of Canadian Muslims.
My name is Mustafa Farooq, and I am the Executive Director of the National Council of Canadian Muslims. Since fighting for the repatriation of Maharar so many years ago, NCCM has always stood up for Canadians unjustly detained and subjected to abuse. I'm here today to stand with the family of Yasser Albaz. Yasser is a Canadian. Yasser is your neighbor. Yasser is you. I have a very simple message today for the Minister of Foreign Affairs. No Canadian should be abandoned. Yasser is in a prison cell, subjected to horrendous abuse, and that's an attack on all Canadians. We cannot allow this to continue. Minister, we call on you to do two things. Firstly, we ask that you negotiate for Yasser's safe return. And secondly, we ask you that when you come home with Yasser. In 2007, I visited Cairo with my older brother. The reality is that just like Yasser, I too could have been detained. We are all Yasser. We are all Canadian. Minister, please bring Yasser home. And with that, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Tim McSorley from ICLMG.
Good afternoon. My name is Tim McSorley. I'm the National Coordinator with the International Civil Liberties Monitoring Group. Last February, our coalition joined Mr. Albaz's family in calling for his immediate release from Tora prison in Egypt and his return to Canada. It is disheartening and frustrating that so many months later, we're forced to reiterate that call for Mr. Albaz to be allowed to return home. The ICLMG continues to be deeply concerned for Mr. Albaz's welfare. We know the terrible conditions at Tora prison, and we have received report upon report from Mr. Albaz's family of the serious impact his imprisonment has had on his health. The lack of charge or trial, or of any real information about why he is being detained, also shows a complete disregard for his fundamental human rights. It appears more and more clear that he will not be released without outside intervention. We are grateful that the Canadian government has taken steps to secure Mr. Albaz's release, but unfortunately these have not borne results. Given the severity of this case, we are disappointed that the Canadian government has not brought more pressure on Egypt to ensure Mr. Albaz's release. This is why we are joining the Albaz family today to ask Minister Champagne to do all that is necessary on his current trip to Egypt to secure Mr. Albaz's release and to ensure that he is returned home to his friends and family in Ontario. Mr. Albaz's detention without charge, renewed regularly without justification or even evidence of a crime, is a clear violation of his most fundamental rights, including the guarantee of the right to life, liberty, and security of the person, as well as the right to be treated with dignity and respect. This is a clear violation of Egypt's international treaty and international human rights obligations, and the Canadian government must swiftly act and clearly denounce these actions and put an end to Mr. Albaz's detention. Our hearts are with Mr. Albaz and his family today as they live through this terrible situation. We urge Minister Champagne to do everything to engage his counterparts in Egypt to ensure Mr. Albaz's release. He should not spend one more minute in an Egyptian jail. Thank you. And with that, I'll introduce Amal Ahmed, Mr. Albaz's daughter.
My father, Yasser Albaz, a 51-year-old Canadian engineer and community leader, has been detained arbitrarily and unlawfully for 10 months by Egyptian authorities. His most basic human rights have been violated. He's been forced to stay in a cell with 17 other men, with one unhygienic toilet, taking turns to sleep on the cold, hard, concrete floor because there isn't enough space for everyone. My father is a businessman who was traveling to Egypt for work, only to be subjected to this tragedy. He has not been charged with a crime and is being held in prolonged detention against international law. For the last 295 days, my father has been asking every single day what Canada is doing to get him out and bring him home. For 10 months, thousands of Canadians have been advocating for government intervention to secure his release. Emails, postcards, and letters have been sent, and phone calls have been made to members of Parliament and Global Affairs Canada calling for urgent action. We have garnered almost 400,000 signatures across Canada who have signed a petition through change.org asking our minister to intervene. We are aware and we are grateful for the efforts of our Canadian Embassy to provide regular consular support and services, and that former Minister Freeland raised concerns several times with Egyptian authorities. But quite frankly, that is not enough. On Monday, we learned that our Minister of Foreign Affairs, François-Philippe Champagne, is on his way to Egypt for a summit. We are appealing to him to not only raise his case, but to use all means necessary to secure my father's release and his safe return home. This year, my father has missed my younger sister's wedding, my brother's 8th grade graduation, my children's 1st and 3rd birthdays, and his 26th anniversary with my mom. He even spent his own birthday in a dreadful prison cell last March. My father has done absolutely nothing wrong. He has suffered immensely. He needs medical help, and he needs to be reunited with our family. Thousands of Canadians have been calling for the minister to go to Egypt, and now he's there, and we are here in Ottawa today to ask him to bring my father home before the holidays. It's been 295 days of pure exhaustion. It's been 295 days of suffering, pain, and feeling like our hearts are shattered into a million pieces. And I don't know how much longer we can take it. I don't know how much longer he can take it. In my father's own words from Torah prison, "Don't forget about me," he said. "Ask my Canadian government to bring me home." And thank you. And with that, I'd like to introduce my mother, Safa El-Ashmawi, to share a few words.
Peace be upon all of you. My husband and I immigrated to Canada over 20 years ago. He worked hard for our family. We settled in Oakville, Ontario, where he built his engineering company. And today his company employs many of Canadians. We are proud Canadian. My husband and I served this country through volunteering and community building. Despite the continued detention of my husband for 10 months without charges, the Canadian government went ahead early this year and downgraded the travel advisory to Egypt. When Yasser heard about that, he asked his lawyer if Canada had done this to secure his release. A delegation of senators went to Cairo several months ago. My husband heard that the senior delegation was visiting Egypt, and he asked his lawyer again if they were coming to secure his release. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau attended the G7 summit along with the head of the Egyptian regime. When my husband heard about that, he asked his lawyer again if Justin Trudeau, he tried to secure Yasser's release and bring him home. Sadly, none of these major bilateral opportunities were used to do anything for Yasser. Today, he's spending 295 days in a small, dark cell in Torah prison. Now our new Foreign Minister, François-Philippe Champagne, is visiting Cairo, and he's the most senior official visiting Egypt since 2016. We are here to demand serious, swift action to bring my husband home. I'm so worried about my husband. I miss him so much. My children need their father. My teenage boy, he needs his father in this critical age. My grandchildren, they miss their grandfather. The reason Yasser has so much support is that he was someone who touched so many lives. He dedicated his life to help others, to help those who are less fortunate and his community. Yasser never saw someone in need and gave his back to him. A country should be proud of such a citizen and not to leave him behind. I pray every single day for Yasser's safety. It's time for him to come home now. Thank you so much.
If there are any questions, we'll take them now.
I'm just wondering, have you gotten any indication as to what was the reason? No charges have been laid, but has there been any indication as to what was the reason for his detainment?
To this day, there have been no indication whatsoever on why he's being detained. Even his lawyers don't have this information. Even when he was questioned in the beginning, when this was under investigation, the question was very general, and we have not been given any information, including our lawyer and my father himself.
He was there on a business trip?
He was there on a business trip, 2 months, a 2-month business trip. He was supposed to come back on family day, and right before he boarded the plane, when he was going through passport authorities, passport control, the authorities confiscated his Canadian passport, and they did not allow him to fly, and he disappeared for a few days. We had no idea where he was, and then we learned he was in Tora prison, where he continues to be arbitrarily detained.
And, I mean, it's an engineering business, so there's
He owns an engineering firm in Oakville, correct?
So what was the nature of the business that he was there for?
He had a client, an engineering client. It shouldn't show any indication as to why, he's in trouble. Even the questions, nothing. There has been no concern over his job there whatsoever. He's been to Egypt back and forth we've been in Canada for 20 years. He has business trips all over. This has never been a concern.
And what sort of consular access has he had since he was arrested?
The embassy has been able to visit him less than a handful of times since this happened in February, and they're able to visit him, of course, not in his actual prison cell, but they're able to check on him and see if he's okay. And they always say that, of course, his mental state is not very well, and that, it's very clear that it's taking a toll on him.
You mentioned that he was traveling on a Canadian passport. Does he hold another? I'm just curious as to whether Egypt considers him a citizen.
So he is a dual citizen. He does hold the Egyptian passport. But what's important is that he entered as a Canadian. He entered on his Canadian passport. That's what he was using. And he's been a Canadian for 20 years. So he's absolutely a Canadian, and that's all that matters.
And beyond the press release going out earlier this week about Minister Champagne going to Egypt, had there been any communication towards your family or his lawyer or anyone involved that Champagne would be going?
So we've been in touch with the minister, and we're aware that he's been briefed about the case, and we do know that he's aware of his case on this trip, but the question is what will actually be done on this trip. He has expressed, Minister Champagne expressed his solidarity with our family, but, we hope that solidarity ends up with him bringing him back on a plane. We want to go to Pearson and greet both of them, right? Minister Champagne needs to put my dad on a plane, bring him back with him, and secure his release, by all means necessary.
I understand, as you mentioned, that former Foreign Affairs Minister Chrystia Freeland had reached out to your family to express concern. What were some of the things that she said at the time?
She definitely expressed a lot of concern for our family, and she, it was very clear that she cared, and we're very grateful for all the help that the Canadian government has given us. And there have been several steps where we know that the Canadian government raised this with high-level authorities in Egypt, but the question remains is, his conditions still have not changed. My father's condition have not changed. They have not improved, and he's still not here. So, we need more than just caring. We need strong action, and we need someone to put him on a plane, negotiate his release, and bring him home.
And sorry, just one more. I understand what you were saying about him traveling on his Canadian passport, but I'm wondering, has people who were with him, the authorities, have they said anything to indicate that from their view they think he's an Egyptian citizen and should be treated as such?
None whatsoever. They're aware that he's Canadian, and that's all we know.
Do you have even any sort of suspicion as to what caused them to detain him?
Absolutely not. I mean, arbitrary detention is not strange in Egypt. It definitely happens a lot. And if you look at organizations like Amnesty and Human Rights Watch, they discuss this often. There are thousands of political prisoners, tens of thousands in Egypt. So it's not a strange thing in Egypt. But for us, all that we care about is that my father is an innocent man. He's done absolutely nothing wrong. He has no political affiliations whatsoever. He's not active politically. So this came as a complete shock to our family when it happened. And to this day, we're very concerned and we're very confused.